I never believed in ghosts until I moved into room 237 at Hillcrest University. It was my freshman year, and I was excited to start this new chapter of my life. My roommate Jake seemed like a cool guy, and we hit it off right away. But it wasn't long before strange things started happening. At first, it was just little things. I'd put my keys on the desk, turn around for a second, and they'd be gone. I'd find them in weird places, like inside my shoes or balanced on top of the door frame. Jake and I laughed it off, blaming each other for the pranks. Then came the cold spots. You know how dorm rooms can be drafty, right? But this was different. You'd be sitting at your desk, and suddenly it felt like you were standing in a freezer. The cold would creep up your spine, making the hair on the back of your neck stand up. We tried to ignore it, but things kept escalating. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom. As I stumbled back to bed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A dark, shadowy figure was standing in the corner of the room. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and seemed to be watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light, a leftover image from a dream. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The incidents became more frequent and harder to explain away. Jake and I would wake up to find our belongings scattered across the floor, as if someone had ransacked the room while we slept. But nothing was ever missing, just rearranged. One particularly unsettling night, I was up late studying for a midterm. The room was quiet except for the soft tapping of my keyboard. Suddenly, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "Get out," it said, clear as day. I spun around, but there was no one there. Jake was sound asleep in his bed. The next morning, Jake confessed that he'd been hearing things too. Footsteps when no one was walking, muffled crying coming from the walls, and sometimes, just like me, whispers telling him to leave. We decided to do some research on our dorm. What we found chilled us to the bone. 30 years ago, a student named Sarah had lived in our room. She'd been struggling with depression and, tragically, had taken her own life right there in room 237. The realization hit us hard. We weren't just dealing with some random ghost or spirit. We were living with Sarah's restless soul. But why was she still here? What did she want from us? As the days went by, the activity in our room intensified. Objects would fly across the room on their own. We'd wake up with scratches on our arms and legs. The whispers became louder, more insistent. "Help me," they'd say. "Find it." We knew we had to do something. We couldn't keep living like this, and clearly Sarah couldn't move on. But what were we supposed to find? What could possibly help a spirit trapped for 3 decades? Desperate for answers, Jake and I started digging deeper into Sarah's story. We spent hours in the university library, going through old newspapers and yearbooks. We even tracked down some of her old classmates who were still in the area. What we uncovered was heartbreaking. Sarah had been a bright, talented art student with a promising future, but she'd also been hiding a dark secret. In her final days, she'd confided in her best friend about an abusive relationship she couldn't escape. The more we learned, the more the paranormal activity in our room seemed to change. The violent outbursts lessened, replaced by a heavy, sorrowful presence. Sometimes we'd wake up to find beautiful, haunting sketches on our notepads, drawings we knew neither of us had made. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I felt a gentle touch on my forehead. In my mind's eye, I saw flashes of images, a painting of a sunset, a locked drawer, a tarnished locket. When I opened my eyes, the room was filled with a soft, bluish glow. There at the foot of my bed stood Sarah. She wasn't the terrifying specter we'd glimpsed before. Instead, she looked sad, lost, and incredibly young. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I understood. She wasn't trying to scare us away, she was asking for help. The next morning, Jake and I tore the room apart. We checked every drawer, looked behind every poster, and felt along every inch of the walls. Finally, behind a loose baseboard, we found it, a small, ornate box covered in dust. With trembling hands, we opened the box. Inside was a collection of Sarah's most treasured possessions, a delicate silver locket, some old photographs, and a folded piece of paper. As we carefully unfolded the paper, we realized it was Sarah's suicide note. The note was heartbreaking. Sarah wrote about feeling trapped, about the abuse she'd endured, and her fear that no one would believe her. But she also wrote about her art, how it was the one thing that gave her peace. She mentioned a painting she'd been working on, her masterpiece, that she'd hidden away. That night, Sarah appeared to us again. This time there was no fear, just a profound sadness that filled the room. She pointed to the closet, then vanished. Jake and I looked at each other, understanding dawning on our faces. We rushed to the closet and started feeling along the back wall. Sure enough, we found a loose panel. Behind it was a rolled-up canvas. With shaking hands, we carefully unrolled it. The painting took our breath away. It was a self-portrait of Sarah, but not as the broken, scared girl we'd imagined. In the painting, she stood tall and strong, her face full of determination and hope. The background was a vibrant sunset, symbolizing new beginnings. As we stared at the painting, the room temperature dropped dramatically. Sarah appeared once more clearly than ever before. She smiled at us, a smile full of gratitude and relief. Then, she turned towards the painting, took a step forward, and simply faded into it. In that moment, we knew Sarah had finally found peace. The oppressive atmosphere that had haunted our room for weeks lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. Jake and I looked at each other, tears in our eyes, overwhelmed by what we'd just witnessed. The next day, we took Sarah's belongings and her painting to the university's art department. We told them Sarah's story, leaving out the supernatural details. The faculty was amazed by the quality of the forgotten student's work and moved by her tragic story. They organized an exhibition in Sarah's honor, showcasing her recovered painting alongside her other works from the university's archives. At the exhibition's opening, we saw many of Sarah's old classmates, now in their 50s, some of them moved to tears by the memory of their long-lost friend. As for our room, the paranormal activity ceased completely. No more missing objects, no cold spots, no whispers in the night. But sometimes when the light hits just right, I swear I can see a faint outline of Sarah's figure, smiling and at peace. This experience changed Jake and me profoundly. We both switched our majors to psychology, with a focus on trauma and healing. We want to help people like Sarah, to make sure no one feels so alone and hopeless that they see no way out. I still don't know if I believe in ghosts, not in the traditional sense, but I do believe that sometimes the pain and trauma we carry can linger, reaching out across time and space, asking to be acknowledged and healed. And sometimes all it takes is for someone to listen, to care, and to help bring that pain into the light. I've always been a night owl, but that night at the campus library changed everything. It was just past midnight, and I was buried in textbooks, cramming for my upcoming finals. The library was eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of pages breaking the silence. As I reached for another book, something caught my eye. A shadowy figure moved between the shelves, barely visible in the dim light. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But there it was again, a dark silhouette gliding silently through the stacks. Curiosity got the better of me. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound echoed through the empty library, and I winced. Slowly, I made my way towards where I'd seen the figure. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I peered down the aisle. Nothing, just rows and rows of books stretching into the darkness. I turned to head back to my table, but something made me freeze. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. This time it was closer. I spun around, heart pounding, but the figure vanished like smoke. For the next hour, this dance continued. Every time I thought I was getting close, the shadowy presence would disappear, only to reappear elsewhere in the library. It was like a twisted game of cat and mouse, and I wasn't sure which one I was. By the time the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the windows, I was exhausted and on edge. As I packed up my things, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something truly sinister. The next morning, I stumbled into the campus coffee shop, desperate for caffeine and human interaction. As I waited for my order, I overheard two librarians talking in hushed tones. My blood ran cold when I caught snippets of their conversation. "Another one gone missing," the older librarian whispered. "That's the third this year." Her colleague nodded grimly. It's always the ones who stay late. You'd think they'd learn by now. I couldn't help myself. I approached their table, introduced myself, and asked what they were talking about. The librarians exchanged wary glances before the older one sighed. You're new here, aren't you? She asked. When I nodded, she continued, There's something you should know about our library. Over the years, students have disappeared, always at night, always when they're alone. My mind raced back to the shadowy figure I'd seen. How many? I managed to croak out. Too many, the younger librarian replied. At least one or two every year, going back decades. The police have investigated, but they never find anything. As they spoke, I felt a growing sense of dread. Had I narrowly escaped becoming another statistic? The librarians warned me to never stay in the library past sunset, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. Something in that library had noticed me, and I feared it wouldn't let me go so easily. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my mind reeling with questions. What was lurking in the library at night, and more importantly, what did it want? Despite the warnings, I couldn't stay away. The mystery of the library consumed me. I spent days researching the building's history, digging through old newspapers and town records. What I found chilled me to the bone. The library had been built on the site of an old asylum, infamous for its cruel treatments and high death rate. When it was finally shut down in the 1950s, the bodies of several patients were never accounted for. The town had hoped that building a place of learning would erase the dark history, but it seemed some things refused to be forgotten. As the sun began to set, I found myself drawn back to the library. I knew it was foolish, but I had to know the truth. I hid in a study room, waiting for the staff to leave and the lights to dim. Once darkness fell, I emerged, armed with only a flashlight and my desperate curiosity. The library felt different at night, alive in a way it wasn't during the day. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from empty aisles. I made my way to the oldest part of the building, where the original asylum's foundation still stood. That's when I saw it again, the shadowy figure. But this time, it didn't vanish. Instead, it turned towards me, revealing a face that was barely human. Sunken eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. As the figure glided towards me, I realized with horror that it wasn't alone. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the darkness, reaching out with gnarled hands. My paralysis broke, and I ran. I tore through the library, knocking over books and chairs in my desperation to escape. The whispers grew louder, becoming a cacophony of tormented voices. They spoke of pain, of experiments, of being forgotten and left to rot. I realized with growing horror that these were the lost souls of the asylum, trapped between worlds and hungry for revenge. They saw the students who came to learn as nothing more than fresh subjects for their eternal torment. As I ran, I caught glimpses of other students, pale, transparent figures with vacant eyes. Were these the missing ones, now part of this ghostly horde? I couldn't bear to look too closely, afraid of recognizing someone I knew. I finally reached the main doors, but they were locked. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I heard the spirits getting closer. In desperation, I grabbed a heavy bust of some long-dead scholar and smashed it through a window. The sound of breaking glass seemed to agitate the spirits. Their wails reached a fever pitch as I scrambled through the jagged opening, not caring about the cuts on my hands and arms. I ran across the empty campus, not daring to look back until I reached the well-lit safety of my dorm. As I collapsed on my bed, gasping for breath, I realized the true horror of the situation. Those spirits were trapped, doomed to relive their pain night after night. And now that they had noticed me, would they let me go? Or would I be forever looking over my shoulder, waiting for the moment they decided to drag me back into their nightmare? In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of my vision, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard those same tortured whispers. I stopped going to classes held in buildings near the library, and my grades began to suffer. I tried to warn others, but who would believe such a fantastical story? A few friends humored me, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. The librarians who had warned me now avoided me, fear evident on their faces whenever I approached. As weeks passed, I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was it all just a vivid hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? But then students started to disappear again. One by one, they vanished without a trace, always last seen heading to the library for late-night study sessions. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let more innocent people fall victim to the vengeful spirits. With trembling hands, I began to research exorcisms and cleansing rituals. If the university wouldn't act, then it was up to me to put these tortured souls to rest. Tonight, as the clock strikes midnight, I'll return to the library one last time. Armed with ancient texts and a desperate hope, I'll confront the horrors that lurk in the shadows. I don't know if I'll succeed, or if I'll become just another missing student, another whisper in the dark, but I have to try. For the sake of those who've been lost and for those who might yet be saved, I have to try. If you're reading this and I don't return, please, whatever you do, stay away from the library at midnight. Some books are best left unopened, some stories best left untold. I never thought joining a club would change my life forever. It all started when I received an invitation to the Enlightened, an exclusive society on campus. The elegant black envelope arrived at my dorm, sealed with a mysterious silver symbol. Intrigued, I accepted without hesitation. The first meeting was held in an old Victorian mansion on the edge of campus. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. The windows seemed to watch me, and the air grew heavy with an unseen presence. Inside, dimly lit corridors led to a grand hall where hooded figures stood in a circle. They welcomed me warmly, but something felt off. Weeks passed, and I found myself drawn deeper into their world. We discussed philosophy, performed odd meditation rituals, and were promised access to hidden knowledge. But there was always an undercurrent of secrecy that made me uneasy. One night, during a particularly intense ceremony, I noticed strange symbols etched into the floor. They pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow. As the chanting around me grew louder, I felt a shift in the air, like reality itself was bending. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure, more darkness than substance, materializing in the center of our circle. Panic gripped me, but I couldn't move. The other members seemed unfazed, even excited. As the shadow began to take form, I realized I'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple college club. This was my first glimpse into the true nature of the Enlightened, and I knew then that I had to uncover their secrets before it was too late. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of that shadowy figure. I started paying closer attention to my fellow members, noticing subtle changes in their behavior. They seemed more distant, their eyes holding a vacant look that sent shivers down my spine. I began investigating discreetly, searching for any information about the Enlightened's history. Late one night in the campus library, I stumbled upon an old yearbook from the 1920s. There, hidden among the pages, was a photo of a group bearing the same silver symbol. The caption read, "The Enlightened, Guardians of the Veil." My heart raced as I dug deeper. Newspaper clippings revealed a pattern of disappearances dating back decades, all coinciding with the club's presence on campus. Each time, authorities found no leads, and the cases went cold. As I was about to leave, I noticed a hooded figure watching me from the shadows. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. I quickly gathered my things and rushed out, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Outside, the cool night air did little to calm my nerves. The next day, I received a cryptic message from the club. "Your curiosity has been noted. Proceed with caution." The words seemed to dance on the page, a veiled threat that made my blood run cold. I knew then that I was in too deep, but I couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and I had to find it before the Enlightened found me first. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to confide in my roommate, Jake. As I began to explain, his expression changed from concern to fear. "The Enlightened?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "My sister disappeared after joining them 3 years ago." Jake's revelation shocked me to my core. We spent the night piecing together what we knew, uncovering a sinister pattern of manipulation and control. The club seemed to target individuals with specific traits: intelligence, ambition, and a hint of vulnerability. Armed with this knowledge, I attended the next meeting with a hidden camera. The ritual began as usual, but as the chanting intensified, I felt that familiar shift in reality. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. When the lights flickered back on, 2 members were missing. Panic erupted, but the leaders calmed everyone, claiming the chosen had ascended. Their words sent chills down my spine. I knew I had witnessed something horrifying, but I couldn't prove it. Back in my dorm, I reviewed the footage with shaking hands. To my horror, the camera had captured only static during the blackout. However, in one frame, I caught a glimpse of that shadowy figure from before, its form more defined, reaching out with elongated fingers towards the now missing members. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What were they doing with the chosen ones? Where did they go? And most importantly, how could I stop them? As I sat there, grappling with the weight of my discovery, a notification pinged on my phone. It was an email from the Enlightened. "Your ascension awaits. Come alone tomorrow night." I knew attending the meeting could be a trap, but it might be my only chance to find answers. With trembling hands, I prepared myself, hiding a small recorder in my shoe and sending Jake my location details, just in case. The mansion loomed before me, darker and more foreboding than ever. Inside, the air crackled with an otherworldly energy. I was led to a chamber deep within the house, where the other members gathered in a tight circle. In the center stood an ornate mirror, its surface rippling like liquid silver. The leader approached me, his face hidden beneath a gilded mask. "You've shown great potential," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "It's time for you to see beyond the veil." Before I could react, 2 members grabbed my arms, forcing me towards the mirror. As I struggled, the surface began to swirl, revealing glimpses of a realm that defied comprehension. Twisted landscapes, impossible geometries, and creatures that sent jolts of primal fear through my body. I felt myself being pulled forward, the mirror's surface giving way like a membrane. In that moment of sheer terror, I realized the horrifying truth. The Enlightened weren't just a cult, they were gatekeepers to something far worse. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from my captors and ran. Behind me, inhuman shrieks filled the air. I burst out of the mansion, my lungs burning as I sprinted across campus. I didn't stop until I reached my dorm, locking the door behind me. As I caught my breath, a chilling thought struck me. I had escaped, but for how long? The next few days were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, jumping at every shadow and unexpected sound. Jake and I pored over the audio from my recorder, but it contained only distorted whispers and an odd, pulsating hum. We decided to go to the police, but as we approached the station, we spotted 2 officers wearing silver pins with the Enlightened symbol. The cult's influence ran deeper than we'd imagined. We were on our own. Desperate for help, I reached out to a professor known for his research into the occult. As I began to explain my story, his face grew pale. He hurriedly wrote down an address, telling me to go there immediately. But as we left his office, we saw hooded figures at the end of the hallway. We ran, their footsteps echoing behind us. We managed to lose them and made our way to the address, an old bookshop on the outskirts of town. Inside, we found a group of people, their faces etched with the same fear and determination I felt. They were survivors and family members of the missing, all brought together by their experiences with the Enlightened. As we shared our stories, I realized this was bigger than I could have ever imagined. The cult's tendrils reached through time and across the globe. But here, in this hidden room, we had found hope. We weren't alone anymore. We began to plan, pooling our knowledge and resources. The fight ahead would be dangerous, possibly deadly. But as I looked at the faces around me, I knew we had a chance. The Enlightened had awakened something dark, but we would be the light to fight it.